Love. They say it is the purest thing a person can ever experience. But what if I told you that love is also the most dangerous thing you will ever hold in your hands? Because love, when it is tested, doesn't just break your heart, it can rewrite the very DNA of who you are. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever lost someone not because the love wasn't real, but because of a lie you were fed so perfectly that you swallowed it whole? Stay with me because this story is not just about a girl and a boy. It is about the terrifying power of the truth and what happens when that truth arrives just 1 second too late. Before we begin, if you're the kind of person who believes in second chances, in the slow process of healing, and in finding your way back home after everything has turned to ash, then you know that the path back is never a straight line. Stories like this are rare. They are more than just entertainment. They are a map of the human heart, and they have a way of staying with you long after the screen goes black. Ashley Harrison was not born into a world of comfort. She was born into the cold, hard reality of survival. And survival teaches you lessons that love, in all its softness, never could. Ashley grew up in a house where the walls felt thin and the winters felt long. She didn't just grow up poor. She grew up watching the slow, agonizing decay of a woman who had once believed in fairy tales. Her mother, Martha, had loved once. She had trusted once. And that single moment of vulnerability left her with nothing but a hollow chest and a daughter to feed. Ashley watched her mother stare out of windows at a future that never arrived. No support, no partner, just the sound of the radiator clicking in the dark and the weight of a silence that felt like a death sentence. So, Ashley learned the golden rule of the broken. Don't trust too much. Don't depend too deeply. And whatever you do, never, ever give your whole heart away. Because once it is gone, you don't always get it back. But here's the question we all have to face eventually. If you grow up believing that love always ends in a tragedy, would you ever truly allow yourself to feel it? Hold on to that thought because the exact moment Ashley finally decided to believe was the same moment the world decided to take it all away. When the scholarship letter arrived, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It felt like a key to a door she didn't think she was allowed to open. It was an escape from the poverty, from the limitations, and from the destiny she thought was carved in stone. But what she didn't know was that she was stepping out of the frying pan and into a very different kind of fire. She was entering the world of the Clinton family. The Clintons had everything Ashley didn't. They had wealth that sounded like heavy iron gates closing. They had influence that felt like cold marble floors underfoot. But more importantly, they had choices. And then there was Martin Clinton. Martin was not like the others. He didn't wear his wealth like armor, and he didn't use his name like a weapon. And here is something you need to pay close attention to, because this is where the cracks in Ashley's armor began to show. Martin didn't notice Ashley because she was the most beautiful girl in the room, though she was. He noticed her because she was the only person in the room who wasn't trying to be noticed. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who doesn't demand your attention, but somehow you find it impossible to look away? That was Ashley. And for Martin, she was the first thing in his life that felt real. Take a breath, because this story is about to move from a dream into a nightmare. Their love didn't happen like a lightning strike. It built, day by day, word by word. It was something fragile, like a glass sculpture that both of them were terrified of dropping. But here is the twist that no one, not even Martin, saw coming. Their love didn't fail because they stopped caring. It failed because someone else decided it had to. What would you do if someone deliberately and surgically destroyed the person you loved most, and you never even realized they were holding the knife? Enter Betty. Betty was the ghost of Martin's past, a woman who had never learned how to let go. And then there was Elizabeth, Martin's mother. Elizabeth looked at Ashley and didn't see a girl. She saw a stain on her family's legacy. Individually, these women were dangerous. Together, they were a force of nature. The night of the gala was not an accident. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Every detail, every drink poured, every shadow in the hallway, it was all designed to create one single, poisonous thing: doubt. And here is the terrifying truth about doubt. It doesn't need a mountain of evidence. It only needs one tiny flickering moment. Ashley walked into that room and saw just enough. She saw the way Betty leaned in. She saw the way Martin looked, confused, blurred by the wine they had spiked. She saw a scene that had been scripted by her enemies, and she believed it. Sometimes, just enough information is the most lethal thing in the world. Was any of it real? That was the question that screamed in her head as she ran into the rain. That was the question that stayed with her long after she walked away from the Clinton estate, and long after she changed her number, her job, and her life. But here is what she didn't know. That moment, that betrayal she thought she saw with her own two eyes, was never, ever real. One full year passed. 365 days. But let me ask you something. Does time really heal the wound? Or does it just teach you how to walk while you are still bleeding? Ashley didn't heal. She adapted. She moved to the city. She worked until her eyes burned, and she became stronger. But she also became colder. Because strength without healing is just a wall you build to keep the world out. Meanwhile, Martin was living a life that was even worse than heartbreak. He was living in total, suffocating confusion. He had lost the only woman he ever loved, and he didn't even know what he had done wrong. Brace yourself, because the truth is often the hardest thing to hear. Pay close attention because this next part is where the debt finally gets paid. Ashley had a choice to make. She could stay in the safety of her brokenness, or she could find the courage to face the truth. And here is something most people don't admit. Sometimes it feels safer to stay hurt than to risk being hurt again. So let me ask you, if the truth had the power to heal you, but also the power to break you all over again, would you still go looking for it? Ashley didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't just about Martin. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about everything she had ever believed, about love, about trust, about people. For one entire year, she had told herself a story. In her mind, she was the hero who had survived a tragedy. She was the one who walked away with her head held high, leaving the wreckage of a lie behind her. She had built a life on that pride. She had used that anger as fuel to wake up every morning and build a version of herself that didn't need anyone. But now, that story was cracking, and the truth was seeping through the edges like cold water. Because if Martin never betrayed her, then what did that make her? It meant she hadn't been strong. She had been tricked. It meant the last 365 days of silence were a waste. What did that make the choices she made? Or the walls she built? And here is the part no one prepares you for. Sometimes, the truth doesn't just free you. It confronts you. It looks you in the eye and asks, why didn't you believe in him? Ashley didn't sleep that night, not even for a single moment. She sat by her window and watched the streetlights flicker, listening to the hum of a city that never stops moving. Because every memory she had buried, every moment she had locked away in the basement of her heart, started replaying. But this time they felt different. She remembered the way Martin looked at her that night. Through the lens of her new knowledge, she saw it clearly. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't the distance of a man who had been caught. It was the hollow, terrifying confusion of a man who didn't understand why the world was collapsing. And confusion is not the same as guilt. Did I get it wrong? That question was louder than the city outside. It was louder than her own heartbeat. Morning came, but the sun didn't bring any light. If anything, the weight in her chest had doubled. Because now, she didn't just have her pain to carry. She had doubt. And doubt is a poison that lingers. It doesn't kill you quickly. It just makes you question the ground beneath your feet. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at a woman she barely recognized. Her eyes were sharper now. Her shoulders were set. She was independent, yes, but she was also guarded. She was closed. She was a fortress with no doors. And for the first time, she asked herself something she had been avoiding for years. Did I run because I was hurt, or because I was afraid to find out the truth? Because if she was honest, truly honest, she didn't stay to listen. She didn't stay to demand an explanation. She saw a shadow, and she ran into the dark. And sometimes, walking away isn't a sign of strength. Sometimes, it is just fear wearing a mask. That realization cut deeper than the original heartbreak ever could. Because now, This wasn't just about what Elizabeth and Betty had done. It was about what Ashley had failed to do. She didn't fight for him. She didn't question the evidence. She didn't stay to hear his side. And now, she had to live with the possibility that she had thrown away the only real thing she ever had. So, again, the question stood in front of her. Clear. Unavoidable. Unforgiving. Would she go back? Would she face him? Would she risk everything just for the chance to hear the truth? Or would she protect her pride and stay exactly where she was? Ashley picked up her phone. Her hand trembled, not because she was unsure, but because she knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't just a phone call. This was a door. And once she opened it, there would be no going back to the woman she had spent a year becoming. She dialed the number. She hadn't deleted it, even though she told herself she had. It was burned into her memory. It rang once, twice, 3 times. The silence between the rings felt like miles of empty road. And then silence. Hello. His voice. It was lower than she remembered, rougher. And just like that, every wall she had built for 12 months began to shake. Because some voices don't fade. No matter how much time passes, they stay under your skin. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat felt like it was filled with sand. How do you begin after a year of silence? How do you say hello to the ghost of your past? Martin. Her voice was barely a whisper, a ghost of a sound. And on the other end, there was a sudden heavy stillness. Not anger, not resentment, just a breath held in, a heartbeat skipping. Ashley? He said her name like it still belonged to him. He said it like a prayer he had stopped reciting but still knew by heart. And here's the question. What do you do when something you thought was gone forever still feels exactly the same? I need to see you. No explanations. No long speeches about her mother, or Elizabeth, or the lies. Just the truth. Simple. Direct. Unavoidable. And sometimes that is all it takes to reopen a world that was closed. They met 2 days later. Not at the Clinton estate, where the shadows were too long. Not in the places they used to love. They met somewhere neutral. A quiet park on the edge of the city, where the wind moved through the trees and the memories wouldn't speak louder than they could. And when she saw him walking toward her, she realized something instantly. Time had changed them both, but not in the way she expected. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from a lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from carrying a weight that has no name. He looked like a man who had been living in a house with no windows. And her? She stood her ground. She looked strong, but she knew that strength doesn't always mean you are healed. Sometimes it just means you are good at hiding the scars. They stood there, 10 feet apart, just looking at each other. Because sometimes words are too small for what needs to be said. If you had one chance to say everything you never got to say, would you even know where the first word starts? He spoke first. I didn't do it. No hesitation. No defense. No long-winded explanation of the night at the gala. Just the truth. And for the first time in her life, Ashley didn't interrupt. She didn't turn her back. She didn't walk away. She listened, and that changed everything. Because listening is where the truth finally has a chance to breathe. As they sat on that park bench, the world around them seemed to blur into a soft, distant hum. Martin began to speak, and for the first time, he didn't stop until every dark corner of the last year was illuminated. He told her about the letters. 52 of them. One for every week she had been gone. He had written them in the quiet hours of the night, poured his soul onto paper, and sent them to the only address he had. But Ashley had never seen a single one. She realized now, with a cold, sickening clarity, that her mail had been filtered. Her landlord, a man who always seemed a little too eager to please, had been on Elizabeth's payroll. Every confession, every I love you, every plea for her to come home, had been tossed into a fireplace before she ever stepped through her door. Think about that for a moment. Think about the person you love most in the world, crying out to you, reaching through the dark, while you are on the other side, convinced they have forgotten you. That is not just a lie. It is a theft. They stole a year of their lives. They stole 365 days of peace and replaced them with a hollow, aching silence. But Martin didn't stop there. He told her about the private investigators his mother had hired to follow her to make sure she was moving on. He told how every time he tried to find her, a new obstacle appeared: a business trip that couldn't be avoided, a legal crisis that required his full attention. It wasn't bad luck, it was architecture. Their separation had been designed brick by the people who claimed to love them. Ashley listened, and as she did, the anger she had carried for a year began to change. It wasn't a hot, screaming anger anymore. It was cold. It was steady. It was the kind of anger that gives you a very specific kind of clarity. She realized that if she wanted to truly move forward, she couldn't just walk away again. Running had been her mistake the first time. This time, she was going to walk right into the heart of the storm. "Take me to the house," she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was iron. Martin hesitated. He saw the look in her eyes, and he knew that the girl who had run into the rain a year ago was gone. In her place was a woman who had survived the worst they could throw at her, and she was coming for her truth. The drive to the Clinton estate felt like a journey into another lifetime. The heavy iron gates were just as tall as she remembered. The marble floors were just as cold. But as Ashley stepped into that grand, echoing foyer, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the girl who didn't belong. She walked past the expensive art, past the gold leaf mirrors, and straight into the study where Elizabeth Clinton sat. Elizabeth looked older. The shadows under her eyes were deep, and her hands, once so steady and demanding, were trembling as she held a glass of water. The guilt of a lifetime had finally caught up to her. For 10 minutes, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that feels like it might break the windows. Ashley stood by the mahogany desk, looking down at the woman who had tried to erase her. "You didn't just break my heart," Ashley said, her voice low, resonating in the quiet room. "You tried to break my spirit. You tried to make me believe that the world was as cold and as empty as this house." Elizabeth didn't look up. She couldn't. "I was protecting my son," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow, even to her. "No," Ashley replied. "You were protecting your control. But here's the thing about control: it is an illusion. You thought you could script our lives, but you forgot one thing. You can't tell the heart who to beat for." In that moment, the power shifted. It wasn't about money or names or influence. It was about who had the courage to be honest. And Elizabeth Clinton, with all her millions, had never been more bankrupt. Ashley turned and walked out. She didn't wait for an apology, because an apology wouldn't give her back the year she lost. She didn't need Elizabeth to say she was sorry. She just needed to see that the woman she had feared was nothing more than a lonely person in a very large house. But there was one more stop she had to make. She went back to the small house with the thin walls. She went back to her mother, Martha. Martha was sitting in the same chair, looking out the same window. But this time, Ashley didn't see a victim of fate. She saw a woman who had been waiting for permission to hope. "Mom," Ashley said, kneeling beside her. It wasn't a lie. The love, it was real. And it's still there. They sat together for hours. Ashley told her everything. She told her that the cycle of survival was over. She told her that they didn't have to live in fear of the next heartbreak. Because when you find a truth that is strong enough, it doesn't just heal you. It heals the people who came before you. For the next few months, Ashley and Martin didn't rush into a wedding. They didn't try to go back to the way things were. You can't go back to a house that has been burned down. Instead, they started building something new. They spent long afternoons talking, really talking. They went to the places they had missed. They learned each other's scars. They learned that love isn't about the absence of pain. It's about the presence of trust. Martin left the family firm. He realized that the wealth he had inherited was a cage he no longer wanted to live in. He started something of his own, something small, something real. And Ashley? She finished her degree. She didn't do it to escape poverty anymore. She did it because she finally believed she deserved to be heard. So, as we come to the end of this journey, let me ask you one final question. If you are standing at a crossroads today, if you are holding on to a grudge, or a fear, or a story you've been telling yourself about why you can't be happy, what would happen if you stopped running? What would happen if you looked at the person you lost and, instead of seeing a betrayal, You saw a misunderstanding. Would you have the courage to make that call? Would you have the strength to listen even if the truth hurts? Because the truth brought Ashley back. But it was her choice to stay that changed her life. Love didn't fail her. Fear did. And once she let go of the fear, she found a love that was unbreakable. Not because it was perfect, but because it had been tested by the fire and it didn't turn to ash. It turned to gold. If this story touched something inside you, if it made you think of someone you haven't spoken to in a year or a lifetime, let that feeling stay with you. Let it be the quiet voice that reminds you that it is never too late to ask. It is never too late to listen. And it is never too late to find your way back home. And remember, the end of one story is usually just the beginning of a much better one. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story.